When I first met Ryan, it felt like the universe had aligned just for us. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and I was volunteering at a local fundraiser for the community park. Between setting up tables and arranging flower bouquets, I noticed him, tall, with dark hair and an easy smile that seemed to light up the entire event. He introduced himself while helping me carry a box of supplies. "Ryan," he said, extending a hand. "And you must be the mastermind behind this beautiful setup." I laughed, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. "Hardly. I'm just the unpaid labor." "Well, the park's lucky to have you," he replied, his tone warm. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking whenever we weren't busy. By the end of the event, I couldn't stop smiling. When he asked for my number, I didn't hesitate. Ryan was perfect, or so I thought. He texted me good morning every day, called me just to hear my voice, and surprised me with little gestures that made me feel like the most special person in the world. On our first date, he brought me a single daisy, saying it reminded him of me, simple yet beautiful. We spent hours talking about our dreams, our favorite movies, and the books that shaped us. He was attentive, asking questions that made me feel truly seen. "I've never met anyone like you, Ellie," he said as we walked by the river that night. "You're incredible." Hearing those words from someone as confident and charming as Ryan was intoxicating. Looking back, the first red flag appeared a few weeks into our relationship. I'd gone out to lunch with my best friend, Lila, and posted a photo of us on Instagram. Ryan texted me almost immediately, "Ryan, who's that? I thought we were spending Saturday together. Me, that's Lila. I told you about her. I'm just grabbing lunch, and I'll see you later." "Ryan, you didn't mention lunch." "It's fine, though. Have fun." It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but the tone of his messages left me unsettled. I brushed it off, telling myself he just wanted to spend time with me. The first fight happened over something silly, a missed phone call. I'd been at a family dinner and hadn't heard my phone ring. When I called Ryan back, he sounded distant. "I guess I'm not a priority," he said. "What? That's not true," I protested. "I was with my family, and I didn't hear my phone." He sighed. "It just feels like I care more about this relationship than you do." I apologized, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. "I'll make it up to you," I promised, desperate to smooth things over. At the time, I didn't realize this was the start of a pattern. Ryan started planting seeds of doubt about the people in my life. "Lila seems a little clingy," he said one night after I mentioned her. "I'm not sure she has your best interests at heart. Or, your mom's pretty overbearing, don't you think? You should set boundaries with her." At first, his comments seemed thoughtful, like he was just looking out for me. But gradually, I found myself pulling away from my friends and family, choosing to spend more time with him instead. "That's better," he'd say with a smile. "It's just you and me now." Over time, I began to notice how easily Ryan's mood could shift. One moment, he'd be laughing and affectionate, the next, he'd be cold and distant over something I didn't even realize had upset him. "Are you mad at me?" I'd ask nervously. "No," he'd reply, his tone clipped. "Why would I be?" The uncertainty was exhausting. I started second-guessing everything I said or did, constantly trying to keep him happy. One evening, I confronted Ryan about how his behavior was making me feel. "Sometimes it feels like I'm walking on eggshells around you," I said, my voice trembling. Instead of addressing my concerns, he flipped the script. "You're overthinking, Ellie. I've been nothing but good to you, and this is how you repay me." I ended up apologizing for bringing it up. Afterward, he bought me flowers and took me out for ice cream, as if that erased everything. Months passed, and I barely recognized myself. I'd stopped hanging out with Lila, avoided going out with my coworkers after work, and even skipped family dinners, all because Ryan didn't like it when I wasn't with him. I told myself it was normal to make sacrifices for someone you love. Relationships take work, I'd remind myself whenever doubt crept in. But deep down, I missed the version of myself that wasn't constantly anxious or apologizing. One day, I ran into Lila at the grocery store. Her face lit up when she saw me, but her smile quickly faded. "Ellie, you look tired," she said gently. "I've been busy," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "Busy with Ryan?" she asked, her tone skeptical. I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. "Ellie, I'm not trying to meddle, but, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself lately." Her words stuck with me long after we said goodbye. Despite everything, there were moments when Ryan made me feel like the luckiest girl in the world. Like the time he surprised me with a weekend getaway, saying, "You deserve a break from all the stress." Sitting by the lake, watching the sunset with his arm around me, I let myself believe we could be happy together. But even in those perfect moments, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Something isn't right." Ryan's jealousy grew more apparent with time. At first, it was subtle, questions about my plans, comments about who I was spending time with. But then it became relentless. One evening, I mentioned a group project for work, and Ryan immediately latched onto one detail. "You didn't tell me there was a guy in your group," he said, his tone sharp. "Because it doesn't matter," I replied, confused. He scoffed. "It matters to me. I don't like the idea of you working with some guy I don't know." "No one's working with anyone," I said, trying to reassure him. "It's just a project." But his expression stayed cold, and the evening was ruined. Ryan had a way of making me feel like I was overreacting whenever I brought up his behavior. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said once when I asked why he didn't trust me. "I'm only saying these things because I care about you. Don't you want someone who looks out for you?" His words made me doubt myself. Was I being unreasonable? Wasn't it good that he cared so much? I started second-guessing my instincts, convinced that the problem was me. Slowly but surely, Ryan had pulled me away from the people I cared about most. I rarely talked to my family anymore. Every time I mentioned visiting them, he found a way to dissuade me. "They don't understand us," he'd say. "They're just going to try to come between us." Lila had stopped reaching out entirely. The last time I'd seen her, she said, "I'm here if you need me, Ellie." I mean it. At the time, I dismissed her words, but now they lingered in my mind, a lifeline I wasn't ready to grab. I began noticing how much I'd changed. I used to be outgoing, independent, full of ideas and dreams. Now, every decision felt like it revolved around Ryan, his moods, his preferences, his approval. One night, as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were tired, my shoulders slumped. I wasn't living, I was surviving. But how could I leave? Ryan loved me. Didn't he? Ryan's temper flared more often, but he always found a way to smooth things over. After one particularly heated argument about a comment I'd made online, he showed up at my apartment with flowers. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he said, his eyes wide with sincerity. "I just get scared of losing you. I'll do better, I promise." I wanted to believe him. I clung to the idea that the good moments outweighed the bad. But deep down, I felt like I was losing pieces of myself every time I forgave him. The turning point came during a work meeting. My boss, Kara, asked how I was doing, and her words caught me off guard. "You seem distracted lately," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth to reply, but no words came out. Was everything okay? I didn't even know anymore. That night, I replayed Kara's words in my mind, realizing how much I'd hidden, not just from others, but from myself. Desperate for clarity, I made a list. On one side, I wrote all the things Ryan had done to make me feel loved. On the other, I listed the ways he had hurt me. The second column was much longer. Seeing it on paper was a gut punch. For the first time, I couldn't ignore the truth. Ryan's love came with strings attached, and those strings were strangling me. I reached out to Lila, unsure if she'd even want to hear from me after all the time that had passed. Her response was immediate, "Ellie. I've been waiting for you to call. Are you okay?" Hearing her voice felt like coming up for air after being underwater for too long. We met at a coffee shop the next day, and as I poured out everything I'd been holding in, Lila listened without judgment. "You don't have to stay, Ellie," she said. "You deserve so much better than this." I started pulling away from Ryan, testing the waters of independence. I said no to plans, spent more time at work, and stopped responding to his texts immediately. He noticed. "You've been distant," he said one evening, his voice low and accusing. "Is there someone else?" "No, Ryan," I replied, exasperated. "I just need some space." "Space?" he repeated, as if the word was foreign to him. "From me?" The conversation ended in an icy silence, but I refused to back down. For the first time in months, I spent a weekend without Ryan. I went to the park, caught up on reading, and even joined Lila for a movie night. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that I'd forgotten existed. As I walked home that evening, the air crisp and cool, I realized how much lighter I felt without Ryan's shadow looming over me. But I also knew that breaking free completely would take more strength than I'd ever needed before. The day Ryan gave me an ultimatum was the moment I knew something had to change. "You need to decide what's more important," he said, pacing my living room. "This relationship or your so-called friends?" My stomach twisted. "Ryan, I don't understand why you can't trust me. Lila isn't a threat to us. She's filling your head with lies about me," he shot back. "If you cared about us, you'd cut her off." His words hit like a slap, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm not choosing between you and my friends," I said, my voice shaking. "That's not fair." His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I felt genuinely afraid of what he might do. That night, I couldn't sleep. My chest felt tight, and my thoughts raced as I replayed the argument. What if Ryan was right? What if I was ruining our relationship by holding on to friendships he didn't approve of? But a louder voice in my head whispered, "This isn't love. This is control." The weight of it all hit me like a wave, and I found myself curled up on the bathroom floor, struggling to breathe. It was my first panic attack, and it terrified me. The next morning, I called Lila, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course. Are you okay?" When we met at the coffee shop, I finally let the dam break. I told her everything, Ryan's demands, his jealousy, the way he made me feel like I was never enough. Lila listened intently, her face a mix of concern and anger. "Ellie, this isn't love. It's abuse." Hearing the word felt like a punch to the gut, but deep down, I knew she was right. Lila encouraged me to see a therapist, and after weeks of hesitation, I finally made an appointment. Dr. Morgan, a kind woman with a soothing voice, made me feel safe from the moment I walked into her office. "Tell me about Ryan," she said gently. As I described our relationship, the good and the bad, Dr. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "What you're describing is emotional abuse," she said. "It's about control, not love." Her words echoed Lila's, but hearing them from a professional made them impossible to ignore. With Dr. Morgan's help, I began formulating a plan to leave Ryan. It wasn't as simple as breaking up, his influence over my life was so deeply ingrained that I knew I'd need support to truly free myself. We discussed setting boundaries, finding a safe space to stay, and leaning on my support system. "You're stronger than you think, Ellie," Dr. Morgan said. "You've already taken the hardest step by recognizing the problem." The final straw came during a dinner date. Ryan seemed on edge from the moment we sat down, his questions growing more pointed as the evening went on. "Why haven't you been answering my calls right away?" he asked, his tone accusatory. I've been busy, I said, keeping my voice calm. Too busy for me. The conversation escalated until he finally snapped, maybe I should just leave if I'm such a burden to you. His outburst drew stares from nearby tables, and I felt the walls closing in. For the first time, I didn't try to calm him down. Maybe you should, I said quietly. The breakup happened 2 days later. I asked Lila to stay with me for support, knowing Ryan wouldn't take it well. When he arrived, his anger was palpable. What is this? He demanded, gesturing to Lila. You need an audience for this conversation. She's here for me, I said firmly. Ryan, this isn't working anymore. I can't do this. His expression shifted from anger to disbelief. You're throwing away everything we've built. What we've built isn't healthy, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. I need to take care of myself. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. In the days following the breakup, I felt a mix of relief and grief. Ryan had been such a central part of my life that it was hard to imagine moving forward without him. But as the weeks went on, I began to feel lighter. I reconnected with friends, spent time with my family, and focused on my therapy sessions. Dr. Morgan helped me process the guilt and self-doubt that lingered. Leaving wasn't selfish, she said. It was an act of self-preservation. One evening, I received a text from Ryan. Ryan, I'm sorry for everything. Can we talk? My heart raced as I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted closure, but another part knew that reopening the door could undo all the progress I'd made. I decided not to respond. Instead of focusing on Ryan, I turned my energy inward. I joined a yoga class, started journaling, and even began volunteering at the same community center where we'd first met. Each day felt like a step toward reclaiming myself, my happiness, and my future. I wasn't fully healed, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Breaking up with Ryan felt like stepping into a new world, one where I could finally breathe. The silence that followed his departure was eerie but liberating. I hadn't realized how much space he'd taken up in my life until he was gone. For weeks, I kept expecting him to show up unannounced or send another barrage of texts. But the days passed without incident, and I slowly began piecing myself back together. The first step was reclaiming my routines, going for morning runs, grabbing coffee with Lila, and spending Sundays with my family. These small acts reminded me of who I'd been before Ryan entered my life. Dr. Morgan suggested I write a letter to Ryan, not to send, but to help process my emotions. At first, I stared at the blank page, unsure where to begin. Then, the words poured out. Ryan, you made me feel special when we first met, but somewhere along the way, that turned into control. You wanted me to be someone I wasn't, and I lost myself trying to please you. I loved you, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for your insecurities. I deserve more than that. I deserve freedom. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling, but I felt a strange sense of relief. One of the hardest parts of leaving Ryan was facing the damage his influence had caused in my other relationships. When I called my mom to apologize for my absence, she sounded surprised but happy. I've missed you, Ellie, she said. You don't have to explain. Just come home for dinner this weekend. Reconnecting with my family was bittersweet. I saw the hurt in their eyes, knowing they'd worried about me for so long. But they didn't press me for details, giving me the space to heal at my own pace. One of the lingering effects of my time with Ryan was a deep sense of self-doubt. His constant questioning and criticism had made me second-guess my every decision. Dr. Morgan helped me work through this, encouraging me to take small risks to rebuild my confidence. Trust isn't just about others, she said. It's about trusting yourself to make the right choices. I started saying yes to things I'd once avoided, joining a book club, signing up for a pottery class, and even going to a networking event for work. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Lila became my rock during this time. She cheered me on as I explored new hobbies and celebrated every small victory. One night, as we painted canvases in her living room, she said, "You're glowing, Ellie. It's like the real you is coming back." Her words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living, not just surviving. The progress I'd made was tested when I ran into Ryan at a local coffee shop. I froze the moment I saw him, my heart pounding as he walked toward me. "Ellie," he said, his tone soft. "It's been a while." I forced a polite smile. "Hi, Ryan." He started to speak, but I cut him off. "I'm glad you're doing well, but I need to go." Walking away from him was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it reaffirmed my decision to move on. Dr. Morgan recommended a support group for survivors of emotional abuse, and while I was hesitant at first, I decided to give it a try. Sitting in a circle of strangers, I felt nervous but comforted by the shared experiences. "Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done," one woman said, her voice shaking. "But it was also the best decision of my life." Her words resonated with me, reminding me that I wasn't alone in my journey. As the months passed, I began to rediscover the things that brought me joy. I spent weekends hiking, painted for hours without feeling guilty, and even took a solo trip to the coast. On that trip, as I stood on the beach with the wind in my hair, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. This was my life, and for the first time, it felt like it truly belonged to me. Forgiving Ryan was a process, but it wasn't about absolving him of his actions, it was about freeing myself from the weight of resentment. Dr. Morgan helped me see that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. "It means letting go of the hold he has over you," she said. Writing in my journal one evening, I reflected on how far I'd come. I didn't hate Ryan anymore, but I also didn't need him in my life. That realization felt like the final piece of closure I'd been searching for. By the time I finished my sessions with Dr. Morgan, I felt like a new person. The scars from my time with Ryan hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined me. I had a stronger relationship with my family, a deeper bond with Lila, and a growing sense of self-worth. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my apartment balcony, I smiled, knowing that the future was mine to shape. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. A year after leaving Ryan, I found myself sitting in the same coffee shop where we'd had one of our first dates. This time, I wasn't there to meet anyone. I was there because I loved their chai lattes and wanted to spend a quiet afternoon reading. As I sipped my drink, I thought about how much had changed. The girl who once felt trapped, doubting every decision, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned to put herself first. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. One of the biggest lessons I'd learned was that healing isn't linear. There were days when I felt on top of the world, and others when the past threatened to pull me down. But each step forward, no matter how small, was progress. Writing became a lifeline during this time. I filled journal after journal with my thoughts, fears, and dreams. Putting my experiences into words helped me make sense of them and gave me the clarity I needed to move forward. One of the most empowering parts of my journey was rediscovering who I was outside of a relationship. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned during my time with Ryan, like photography and baking. I joined a local book club, where I met people who shared my love of literature. For the first time, I wasn't worried about pleasing anyone else. I was living for myself. During one of my therapy sessions, Dr. Morgan suggested that I share my story with others. "You've come so far, Ellie," she said. "Your experience could help someone who's where you once were." At first, the idea terrified me. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I started small, joining an online forum for survivors of emotional abuse. Writing about my experiences and offering support to others was cathartic. One day, I received a message from someone who said, "Thank you for sharing. Your story gave me the courage to leave." Those words brought tears to my eyes. Sharing my story online led to an unexpected opportunity. A non-profit that supported survivors of abuse reached out, asking if I'd be willing to speak at one of their events. Standing in front of a room full of strangers was daunting, but as I told my story, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't known before. When I finished, the audience erupted into applause. Several people approached me afterward, thanking me for my honesty. It was a reminder that even the darkest experiences could be turned into something meaningful. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I spotted Ryan sitting on a bench. He didn't see me, and for a moment, I froze. The sight of him brought back a flood of memories, but instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'd spent so long worrying about him, but now, he was just another person in the crowd. I walked past without stopping, my head held high. As I healed, I started opening myself up to new relationships, not just romantically, but with friends and colleagues. I was more cautious this time, setting boundaries and prioritizing my well-being. Trusting others didn't come easily, but I reminded myself that not everyone was like Ryan. One new friendship, in particular, blossomed into something special. Ben, a coworker with a kind smile and an easy laugh, treated me with respect and patience. When he asked me out for coffee, I hesitated, but Lila's words echoed in my mind, "You deserve someone who sees you for who you are." My relationship with Ben was nothing like my time with Ryan. There were no power struggles, no guilt trips, no manipulation. Instead, there was mutual respect, open communication, and a shared understanding that we were both individuals with our own lives and goals. For the first time, I experienced what love could be when it was rooted in kindness and trust. One evening, as I reflected on everything I'd been through, I decided to write a letter to my younger self. "Dear Ellie, you're going to face challenges you never expected, and there will be moments when you feel like giving up. But I want you to know that you're stronger than you think. You'll find your way, even when it feels impossible. Trust yourself, and don't be afraid to let go of what's holding you back. You deserve happiness, and one day, you'll find it. Love, Ellie." The day I posted my story on Reddit, I felt a mix of vulnerability and pride. The responses flooded in, people sharing their own experiences, thanking me for my honesty, and offering support. It reminded me that no one is truly alone, even in the darkest moments. As I closed my laptop and looked out the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I smiled, knowing that I'd reclaimed not just my freedom, but my sense of self. This was my story, and it was far from over.